Welcome to Performance Car Lounge, where each week we speak with enthusiasts selling their beloved performance cars. This week, we speak with the seller of a 2004 Lamborghini Murcielago. Welcome to the first Performance Car Lounge podcast for 2025. We're kicking off the year with an absolute cracker of a car. This is a big hitting supercar which shares its name with a Spanish fighting bull, which was the leading sire after surviving an 1879 fight in Cordoba. It is also the Spanish word for bat, which is quite fitting, as this car could easily be mistaken for the Batmobile. The star of today's podcast is a 2004 Lamborghini Murcielago, and we are joined by the seller of the car, Bernard. Welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we get into the reason for the sale of this epic car, let's start with how you initially became interested in this 6.2 litre V12 all-wheel drive icon.
Pretty much, I think it's a very similar story to most people who do acquire this car at some stage in their life. Is when we were younger, it was coming out of high school. That was the car. We had the Diablo on the wall, and the poster on the wall. And that's what we aspired to have. And then as soon as we were able to sort of get out of high school, so mine was around 2000, this thing was starting to, be in production, and there was a lot of talk about it. And, when you're starting to work, you start dreaming and you think, I'm making money. One day I'm going to own something like this. This is the car. So then eventually the Diablo poster was pushed to the side, and then the Murcielago poster was on the wall. And it's one of those dream cars that, you've always had in the back of your mind, that you think one day when I have the opportunity or the level to be able to achieve something like this, that I'm going to do it. Some people do tend to veer, and go down to a more modern route. I like the journey. So I wanted to still kick that bucket list off to say, yes, I've achieved it. It's there. I look at it, and it's one of those cars that every time you walk past the window, it just catches you, and you walk away for 5 minutes, come back, and it just the fire is still there, that in your system, and I think it's one of those cars that I just had to get. It's one of those things I couldn't just let slide.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to it being a hero car. You speak about it, about being the poster car for when you were a high school kid. And for me, I'm probably a bit older than you. It was the Countach.
You look a bit younger.
Before that. But I also recall this car being on the cover of the Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 video game, which brings back a whole heap of memories for me. That game actually had an unreal soundtrack too. Fever for the Flavor by Hot Action Cop and Cracker Song. So this car brings back a whole heap of memories, and it was actually in that yellow that you've got as well. Yeah. It's such a striking car.
It's so iconic as well. And that's the thing, is when this car pulls up, and you might have a lot of modern Lambos, Ferraris, things like that. But the moment a Murcielago pulls up, it's literally, it talks to the people, it's that iconic look, that styling, where a lot of the newer cars, while they might be more aggressive and, more sharper angles, things like that, which is a natural path of car manufacturing and things like that with styling, this just retains a timeless look. And it blows away so many people when they ask me, Bernard, what year is this? And they say, is it 2015? Is it 2020 even? I'm like, no, this is 2004. And people just nearly fall over, because it just has that iconic, classic Lambo look, which is, synonymous. I love it.
I agree. You talk about more modern cars, but I think this car sits in a time period that straddles the traditional Lamborghinis and the modern ones. So I think you get a lot of the benefits of modern cars with this era car, but also a lot of the character and some of the analog, engagement of the
100%. And I think that analog engagement that you mentioned is probably the key to this car, is because up until, I think it's 2012 or 2013, whenever these actually started wrapping up. I think it was a little bit earlier than maybe 2011. That was the last of the real analog cars, and that the ones that, the Aventador did take on the single plate clutch as well. So that still, kept that going, but for good reason. It was that engagement, that brutal, gear change that smacks you in the back. And you don't get that with anything else. Everything's becoming more refined. but that's how this car talks to you. And, most people that have cars like this will probably have other cars as well. And it's one of those cars that they go to for that experience, for that feel. And that's the reason why I enjoy it so much, is because, it takes you back, but also it's taking you forward at the same time. It's like you're sort of, doing both at the same time. It's great.
You talk about that gearbox, and that is something special, well worth talking about. It's called an e-gear, and it's an automated manual. So it's not a manual transmission. You actually have to drive it almost like a manual. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, actually, the mechanics of the gearbox is actually a manual gearbox. So the way it actually operates is there's essentially, hydraulic arms and pistons and everything linked up to a paddle shift system, but it shifts exactly like it would a manual underneath. So when you're flicking the gear, it will go from first to second, exactly the same as if you had an actual shifter, which is why there are these conversion kits that people are starting to actually release. These days you see them on YouTube and things like that, where people are converting a e-gear system to a gated manual, because it's literally buy the parts from Lamborghini that you need, and it will bolt up to that gearbox, and the gearbox stays the same. Your linkages have changed. So that's what I think is actually really impressive about the car, is that the gearbox is a manual, but you have to shift it like a manual, but with the gears. And I guess the beauty about these things, the e-gear system, is the downshifts, where, when you're driving something like this, when you're trying to do it with a manual, it's quite heavy, and, you're working through the gears. So trying to get that sound and trying to actually do that in real life terms, it's not going to happen all the time. You're only sort of doing it when you're maybe pulling up to a Cars and Coffee, or downshifting around in a lane when you take it on the track, which you more than likely wouldn't do with this thing. So that's the beauty about that gear system. And I actually really enjoy it. I've got it on my Gallardo as well, and I love it. It's a bit more refined on the later model ones, but you still hear it changing and shifting like a manual. You can hear it happening in the column there, in the tunnel ram. So you'll flick a gear and it'll go pump, and then you'll flick it again, and it's all happening there, which is that analog engagement, which is actually really good.
And it still requires skill and input from the driver to
for sure,
operate properly. Like, for example, if you're doing a hill start, you can't just take off like you would in an automatic car.
No, that's right. You tend to feather, like you end up using your left foot instead of where it would normally be on the clutch. You got it on the brake. Yeah. And then so you're still using your left and your right foot, except the way I drive both of these is I always have my left foot on the brake, and that's how I drive it all the time. Right foot's on the accelerator, left foot's always on the brake, because as you're coming down, the gears are even slowing down to a corner or a halt. Your left foot's on the brake, but you're essentially dropping the gears, bringing them down to where the rev point needs to be. So that engagement is still there. The only thing you're not doing is just popping the clutch in and out, which the fact that it takes that away, it's actually really good. It's actually a really good engagement. And I think that's the reason why they sold so many of the e-gear systems when it was released, because not only was it new technology, but it was also super, super engaging. And it was downshift, the rev matching. It was faster changing, gear shifting than you would if you could in the manual. So you're up there, your downshifts are always flawless. And it's just it's a different and unique way of driving. And
I imagine if you don't drive it in use your brain and drive it in a sympathetic manner, you could probably burn through clutches really quickly.
It's very true. There's a few things about this car and of the similar cars of that era. There is a way and a method to drive them, and a lot of people have spent a lot of money figuring that out. But once you you get a long life out of it. It's just about the education. People get scared of them and they think, you'll burn through clutches. It's like, no, it's if you drive it the way it's supposed to, it'll last you like, 20, 30, 40,000 kilometers between each, thing. So there is a way to do it. And you may be aware of this is, if you treat it like a manual, which it is, It lasts like a manual would. So when you're off you take off, your foot's on the accelerator, off you go, but you don't ride it. You get into it, which is, one of these things you want to make sure the traffic's ahead of you a little bit. You let them take off a bit and put your foot down and off you go. So the clutch sort of engages a lot quicker rather than dragging it out and riding the clutch. So once you're off and you do that, the simple thing is when you change gear is you just back off on the accelerator the same way you would on a manual. Flick your gear, and then you go back on it. And you get used to it where essentially you're not really coming all the way off. You're just sort of like just releasing a little bit and back on. You become very quick at it. And so that engagement's still there. You're still driving it as if you were a manual because realistically it is. And you're just having to learn how to do that in between the shifts.
I love that. And I think it just adds to the character of the car, which was something that people were worried about. This was the first car that was produced under what was then the new ownership by the Volkswagen Audi group. So Audi had recently purchased the brand. There'd been a few owners prior to that. After Ferruccio Lamborghini, there was just prior. The prior owners were called Megatech, which were an Indonesian company. There was some Swiss bloke which owned Lamborghini for a while, and even Chrysler owned it for a period. So there was a bit of instability, and I think people were worried that this car, under the ownership of Audi, would lose its character. But it certainly, in my opinion, doesn't seem to have done that. It seems to have benefited from the reliability and what comes with being an Audi, all that research and development, but still has that Italian character and flair.
Yeah, I think the good thing about the Audi ownership is they made these things reliable, where the previous generations always had electrical issues, gremlins. Even the engineering behind it was, especially when you have to make maintenance and repairs, there was a lot that needed to be either removed or done to actually get to that part. It wasn't really, they literally built the driveline and and then they built the car around it previously, where this generation was a bit more intelligently done. Even though it was an Italian designer, I think he was either Dutch or somewhere along those lines, or I can't actually remember or recall that one. But the design was from him, who obviously still worked for Audi Volkswagen, but the engine still remained 100% Lamborghini. Yeah. Which is why I appreciate this car so much, because it's literally one of the last Lamborghini engines that was done before it was actually taken over, especially in the V12 line, before it was then more of an Audi Volkswagen involvement. But in this particular car, it's the reliability. The electrics don't fail. Even though the time that I've owned it, it's little things that a 20-year-old car eventually start to wear, like a switch might eventually, a commonly used switch like your windows, eventually starts to be a little bit dicky and you'd replace it. But it's nothing different like another car of the same year would give you. But in regards to it's the motor, the driveline, brakes, the reliability, the longevity you get out of them is incredible. And I think that's what the Audi involvement, the Volkswagen involvement is really, really, the car benefits from it drastically.
Yeah, some people even refer to it saying it could have been a Diablo Mark III, but you've got that Audi reliability there as well. How long have you owned the car, and what have you done with the car since you've owned it?
So I've got to recall I've had it for about 3 years. I purchased it from Melbourne, although it was a Sydney car originally. I bought it from a dealer, which I've dealt with in the past. And I knew that, there was a few things that needed to be done to the car to sort of get it to the level where I would want it to be. And, there's maintenance things that I did straight away as soon as I received it, but I knew the things that it needed to be done to it. The main one, the predominant one, was the clutch. Which is a decent job in these cars, because they still retain the motor and the gearbox in a typical fashion, obviously where the gated shifter would normally be. So the gearbox is towards the middle of the car and then the motor's at the back. So to get to that clutch, it's a bit of a process where the motor has to be removed and then you dive in and you replace that clutch. So a lot of people will normally sell one of these cars because they don't want to do the work. So they'll drive it, get it to this point and they're like, well, we know we're up for X amount of dollars and I'm going to move it on and let someone else deal with it. I happen to be that person, but I knew what I was getting into. And to me, the benefit of that is obviously the purchase reflected what was needed to be done to the car. So there's no issues there or surprises. But I think the one thing that I appreciated from that is that the vehicle then has a fresh clutch, and it's then only how I treat the car is how the longevity I'm going to get out of the car. So to me, it's a brand new platform. Everything, when the motor was out, you fix things like clips, hoses, anything that may show a few signs of perishment and things like that. You go through it all, and to be honest, it didn't even need that much. It's literally the main thing was the labor component, motor out, new clutch, motor back in, test drive, make sure your pressures and things like that are working, and off you go. So I think that was the most, the largest bit of work that needed to be done to the car. But really, it's just maintenance, and it was due maintenance. And being that it was a city car most of the time, I suspect that it was being not driven correctly. It doesn't. These cars like the open road.
Yeah.
They're not cars to cruise around with, go pick up your groceries. While you can do that, and I've done that myself, but the way they respond better is to allow them to breathe and get out on the road. They're autobahn killers. That's what they're designed for. One of the fastest cars in the world at the time, if not, I think the fastest in 2004. That was it. So it's not designed for putting around. It was a purebred Lamborghini. Rock and roll. So that was one thing. And then other than that, maintenance wise, things like tires. When I got the car, the tires were expired and a bit crackly. This car was pretty much a show car, sitting there in someone's driveway looking pretty on their garage. Sorry. So yeah, did the tires, put some more modern compounds on it just to get the benefit of what we have available these days. A few little things that. Like there was like a little module inside. The module was functioning fine. It does the headlights and the windscreen wipers. It's a module for both. But I had a crack through it that annoyed me. So it's one of those things. It sits somewhere inside the front trunk, and it must have been touched up or hit or something like that. And it had a little mild crack. Anyway, $3,500 later, because of my OCD, I replaced it. And it's things like that. Really, it's more just preserving the car. To me, it's an honor to be able to have one of these because they were a low volume production vehicle.
Absolutely.
I think 4,099, if my memory serves me correctly, were made of this car globally, including their race cars, SVs and things like that. So the production run is so unique. And every time I look at it, I pinch myself and go, you know what, like you're lucky to have this thing because there's not that many of them and not everyone has that to look at. Yes, there's other nice cars, but to me, this was the one.
You've definitely been a very responsible custodian.
Yeah, I'd like to think so anyway, yeah.
In your ownership, and I can't imagine how dangerous it would have been driving that car on expired tyres with a 6.2-litre V12 engine pumping out that much power. That would have just been an accident waiting to happen on old tyres.
Oh, it was. It would have been, yeah. So that's why I thought, you know what? The thing is you can't experience a car properly until you've got everything in check. As a car enthusiast yourself, you'd know that. Tyres are everything.
And what's it actually like to drive when you get it out on the open road, and what sort of drives do you take it on?
So, again, driving around town, it doesn't like it at all. But you can, but you'll find that because, again, early technology with the e-gear, it was designed to literally you put your foot down, get that momentum, and off it goes. But if you are hesitant when you're with traffic and you're sort of touching it backwards and forwards, things like that, it starts to think, what do you want to do? Do you want to go? Do you want to stop? And so it might get a little bit clunky, and then all you do is you back off, let it sort itself out, and then off you go. But on the open road, when it's in its prime environment, it's great. It's one of those cars that the faster you go, the easier it drives. It's really strange. Like there's other cars, you've got cars as well that are probably doing a very similar thing where they're designed to go at these speeds, where you've got a lot of these other guys who might have a lot more horsepower in their cars with it because they've modified like an Australian vehicle, V8, supercharged it, turbocharged it, whatever, and said, I've got more horsepower. I'm like, yes, but this car is designed to do this. And if you meet me at 300 kilometers an hour and you'll see how long it lasts. Do you know what I mean? It's but not to say I've gone at those speeds in this thing, but it's the experience that the faster you go or the most momentum you have, it's effortless. It just does exactly what it's supposed to do. And you just think, I should be scared, but I'm not. And it off it goes, it's crazy. But I think the best thing about this car is the orchestra. This is the sound.
12 cylinders. What does it redline at? 7,000 something?
I don't know. I haven't spent much time up there, but I think it's around 7.5 or 8. Yeah, it's around there. I would have to have a look. I'm sorry, but I try not to live in that zone too much.
Yeah. So with so much power on tap, what are the brakes like?
Brakes are actually like adequate for the vehicle. There's not a time where it's caught me out and I've just gone, like if I need to hit the brakes for whatever reason or a corner's coming up and we're doing a nice drive day with a bunch of cars and it's a bit spirited, never has there been a time that I've felt that it lacks brakes or it needs carbon ceramics or anything like that. It's just for the driving that I do, perfect. If you were to track it, might be a different story. Maybe you might need a GT3 RS like yours behind us. That's what it's designed for. But again, I don't know at that level what it would be like. I would assume it's good for a while. But, for what it's designed for, being a street car, essentially, great. If you really, and I don't think I've ever had to push it down too hard. And if I did, I'd say I'd feel it a lot harder. But I never have I thought I'm without here. It needs to be upgraded. If anything, it would just be a cosmetic upgrade, which people do. They do the carbon ceramic upgrade from a later or a different model car. I wanted to keep the car exactly how it was when it rolled out, other than a few little tweaks like maybe an exhaust or things like that, just to sort of get a bit more theatre. Other than that, never have I felt that it needs anything more. And maybe a bit of suspension tweaking, like a height maybe, but that's it.
I did notice that you don't have an exhaust on it. I don't know how you have restrained.
I actually do. I just forgot to. Yeah, I do. So again, I forgot to mention it because I just I didn't put it on myself. It actually came with the vehicle. So because I didn't go out of my way to purchase it, my mind slipped, and I should put it there in the ad. But it's actually the exhaust that's on it is really unique. It's got nowadays you've got your Fab Speed, you've got all these like Gentani, all these kind of great modern exhausts. But back in the day, in this particular era, one of the really unique, quite expensive and, not very common exhaust was the Mille Italian exhaust, right? And I don't even know if they're in production anymore, but that's what it's got. And it's really nice. It's a beautiful exhaust. It's not overly loud, but it's loud when you want it to be. It brings out the right note. It sounds like a Formula One car, which is what you want. And it still retains what the car was. It's not trying to make it something else. But yeah, so it does have one. Didn't mention it. Sure.
No, I mean, when I was reading through your ad, I was thinking there would be two things I would do to this car.
Yeah.
To put an exhaust on it. Yeah. And the other thing would be to switch out for the Hercules wheels, which you have on the car, which I think are just the perfect wheel that you can get for.
I love them. Yeah. And the more you look at them, the more you see, and like, yes, they look good from the distance, but they pay homage to like a lot of like your Countach wheels when you see those circles incorporated in the spokes. The rear wheel from an angle when you're looking down the side of the car, it doesn't even look like the same wheel because it's so offset. The moment you look in front of it, then everything looks the same. And I just love that. It's just, it's one of those cars that the more you look at it, the more you see, even though it's not as aggressive as a lot of these, like you see an Aventador, you could look at that for days. But this was like, to me, it was the first of those kind of cars. So I could just look at it and so simple, but just so elegant at the same time. And it's just, it's impressive. Very impressive car.
I mean, it sounds funny saying this about a Lamborghini, but out of all the Lamborghinis, it's probably one of the more subtle looking Lamborghinis without all the wings and spoilers so much, but it's still super menacing to look at. Like you've got those cooling flaps that on the shoulders of the car that is, and really just make it look mean as hell. And the dish on those wheels on the rear is, you could almost fit another wheel inside.
Oh, you could fit a small child in there if you wanted to. Yeah.
It's just such a stunning car where, for a Lamborghini, I think form follows function so much more than a lot of other Lambos out there, which is something I really love.
Like when the SVs and all that came out a little bit later in the production run, I love them as well. I think they look insane, and to be able to get your hands on something like that will be another blessing. But sometimes less is more. It was sometimes when you debate, should I put a spoiler on that car or shouldn't I? Sometimes it just looks cleaner without it. It just has that presence. You put it on, you're like, it's a bit too much, or but it's this one. It's again function. It's flawless. It's just a clean car, and it's still, when you see it on the road, even when we might go on for I just went on a coffee run the other day, and just walking back to the cars, and you see it in the distance. I see it in the garage all the time, but when you see it out in the open, out in public, and the width of it just taking up like practically the entire lane or car park space, it's not normal. Which is like that shouldn't be there. That's something, and that's what I like. I enjoy that.
I mean, it's almost twice as wide as it is high. It's over 2 meters wide, isn't it? I think it's only
205 or Yeah, I think it's around 205 or 210 in width, and most of that's at the back. So it blows my mind when people put those wide body kits on them. I'm like, how wide do you want it?
And I noticed that you've installed a 4K, or there is a 4K reversing camera on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you would need it with a car that wide. Do you have a procedure for reversing this car?
Well, the good thing is the technology I put in there is that I don't have parking sensors on it because, again, it didn't come out with it. I didn't want to put it on, where a camera is very easily removable. It's not taking away. And I didn't want to drill holes in it and things like that. So it's done in a tasteful way. But having that, it's a wide angle camera. And the way the infotainment system is configured is with the camera is it gives you plenty of notice. You've got enough, it turns with I'm pretty sure, I can't remember now, but you've got enough distance and it allows you to see clearly where you are. Yeah. And because of that wide angle, you get everything, everything from where the lines are that you're trying to stay in between, the distance as well. So it gives you the confidence reversing it because, some people, they'll open the door and they'll stick their head out and try and reverse that way. But I haven't had the need to do that. I can still do it civilly.
Yeah. I mean, you just never forgive yourself if you curbed those beautiful rims or scratched a rear bumper or something.
Flawless wheels, not a scratch. So I'll keep it that way.
We spoke about how this car was developed under Audi's ownership, but there's still some very Italian features, and I just wanted to ask you about them and confirm if it's true. And
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is I've heard that the steering wheel and the pedals and everything isn't quite square in front of the driver. They're all a bit offset.
It's actually the seats. They're facing inwards. So instead of being perfectly straight, they're on an angle like that. So because of that, you're sitting there and you're sort of like you're holding the steering wheel a little bit offset, and then your legs have to do the same thing, because everything's sort of going that way. And I think it's just because of the actual gearbox tunnel, the way the way the body is designed, and the seats just have been put there, which is. Which, again, it's part of the car. I think it's the Italian flair, or whether they did it on purpose, I don't know. But it's a quirk that, sometimes people sit in it and then they'll realize and they'll go, are we sitting on an angle? Yeah. And you are. Yeah, that's definitely fact number one. Yep. Yeah.
I think there's the firing order of the cylinders is on a plate at the base of the engine block normally. Is that...
It is. I think it's there. I know it's definitely on the Gallardo. I'd have to have another look, but yeah, it's usually they do have that's a very typical Lamborghini where they've got the firing order, which is I think is nice. It's tasteful. Not that we're going to individually rebuild the motor and we need to know how it goes, but it's just like it's that little connection between you and the machine. That which one is doing what and when. I think that's pretty cool. And
you've got the reverse button doesn't sit anywhere near the gearbox. The reverse button is over on the dash, isn't it?
Yeah, and what's funny is that there's three buttons on the gear selector area, which is like your sport button. Then you've got a blank button, which could have been the reverse, but it's blank. And then you've got your trasher control or your stability control. So why they didn't even just put it in the middle? Yeah. When there's a blank space and put it on the dash, blows my mind. But there's a few Lamborghinis like that. Even the Gallardo's got that, except all those three buttons are taken on the Gallardo, except the for some reason the reverse is still on the dash on the right-hand side of the steering wheel. So
what does the sport button do?
So the sport button pretty much, so you've got like when you first start the vehicle, you can actually drive the vehicle in like essentially like an auto mode, but it's not recommended. It's literally like, it rides the clutch. It does the things that you don't want it to do, where some people might feel comfortable driving it and that if they never driven a car like this and manually shifted. But the moment you put it in a sport, it'll essentially manualize everything. And that's where you want to drive it. That's where you want to be in all these kind of cars.
And does it have adjustable suspension?
From my knowledge, it's got coilovers all around. So it does have adjustable suspension. How much travel, I don't know. But in the rear, you've got two coilovers per corner. So, which is pretty cool. So obviously to take the weight of the engine, everything sits at the back, but you've essentially got, two. I think the Aventador runs a similar thing, but theirs is, more an angle like this, where these ones are on either side of your axle.
And a couple of other little quirks. I think the seat belts come from the middle of the car.
That's way. Right. I was waiting for you to say that. Yeah. So you've, and we get in it all the time, and I just go like this to grab it from our own, like, Murcielago, and you get it. But yeah, it's actually coming from the center over to your right, and the opposite, obviously, for the passenger.
Do you know why they did that?
No idea.
The only thing I can think of is that they were planning potentially for the convertible.
Yeah, well,
maybe there's nowhere to mount them on the.
I think it's because of the doors. Obviously, the length of the doors and where they go up, so it just saves something getting in the way of you getting in and out of the car. That's probably where I would initially say, because from memory, the Roadster was such an afterthought that's why it's like the most painful thing to remove the roof on the Roadsters, and you need 2 or 3 people to help you do it. And that's why most people, if they've got those cars, they just run it without the roof for the entire ownership. If the sun's out, they'll take it out. If it's not, it stays in the garage. Too hard. But so I think, with the seatbelts, I think it's purely for the entry and exit of the coming in and out of the cab because of the doors.
Yeah. And I also noticed that, again, another very Italian thing is where a starter button might have been put for the car, there's a cigarette lighter.
Yeah. I'm sure there's someone in Miami smoking cigarettes in these things. I don't know, but it's definitely not going to be me.
Well, it's absolutely a supercar. I think in some ways it's quite practical. I've noticed that, the scissor doors, obviously with the car being so wide, the scissor doors allow you to get in and out of it in a tight car pretty easily.
100%. Yeah, that would be a problem if it didn't have that, for sure.
Yeah, and it's got a massive front trunk or frunk.
Oh, it's insane. Like when I sometimes I'll pick my daughter up from school if it's and when she's finishing a term, and all the parents and even teachers in the school lineup will say, "Where are you going to put the bag?" And then I pop the front, put her bag in there, her trombone, whatever it is, just I'm packing it in, close it up, no problem, and it's amazing. So yeah, in that regard, or even if you wanted to go do a bit of an overnight stay with your partner or your wife, and you wanted to take off, you could very easily. Where a lot of the other modern ones, they struggle with space there for sure.
It probably does speak to the intent of the car. It's not really so much a track weapon, but more a road trip Autobahn killer where you take it away for the weekend and you can fit a good amount of luggage in there. And
if you're doing miles on this car, it's the one that to take. Like if with a lot of track, more track focused cars, it's uncomfortable, it's tight on space, it's designed for a different but it might be great around corners and things like that. But these things, they have a presence, and when you're out on the open road, you can waft along. It's effortless, and you can plow through the gears. You can just listen to the sound. It's definitely the car to take if you're doing a longer trip, which is I think what they were designed for, which is motorway mayhem, and if you wanted to actually spend some time with it doing some long hauls, you could absolutely. If I was to take any of my cars to Sydney, for example, that's the one I'd take for sure.
Great car for the cannonball run, I reckon.
Yeah. Oh man, perfect for that. That is exactly what it's designed for.
Yeah. All right. So this is a car that was an aspirational purchase for you that you had on the wall as a teenager. Why are you selling it?
So to me, it was it's one of those things. Even my wife keeps reminding me, going, "Bernard, you're going to regret this." And the more even my kids are like, especially my daughter, she's like, "Why are you selling it, Dad? Why?" And to me, it's more about, like I was saying earlier, it's about the journey. I wanted to experience a Lamborghini, especially the one that I've always wanted, thought I would get to a stage in life that I'd go for. I wanted to tick that bucket list off, and I've experienced it enough now to allow me to get into the next model and experience that one. So I want to be able to see similarities. I want to be able to see and feel the engineering shift from how they were with the 6.2, 6.5, and then now they go into I think it was still the 6.5 in the Aventador. So, but then obviously it was a full redesign of the engine. Even when you're sitting inside the car, the way the dash presents itself, you want to be able to then go to the next one and go, this is where history has come, and it's to me, that's the experience. I can hopefully I can afford one again in the future because these things keep climbing up in value. But, if my intent is to enjoy this experience it, and then eventually move it on to someone who has a similar passion to me, and then I then move into a different model and experience that and keep it going from there.
So are we looking at an Aventador or a Revuelto or?
Well, look, I would probably, because of the timeline, I think I'd probably move towards an Aventador. I say that and I kick myself at the same time because to me, I think these look better. Aventador's mass-produced car. Even I went on a V12 drive day and I was the only Murcielago. Everything was, Aventador S, Aventador SVs or SVJs. And I was the only Mercy, and literally the only car that was like non-stop attention was this thing, because they all look the same. And while they're a beautiful car, and it's still one that I'm going to gravitate towards because of my own journey. This thing has a presence of itself. It holds its own. You pull up to any car meet, it's the one that everyone gravitates and runs around. It doesn't matter what's around you. You could have SF90, you could have, it doesn't matter. Everything, woof, straight away to the Murcielago. So it's great for conversation. It's one of those cars that sometimes you own, when you own supercars, people don't want to look at you. They don't want to give you the satisfaction. You get days where it's good, you get days where it's bad. But with this thing, somehow it opens the doors, and people are allowing their feelings to come to their mouths and show their emotion. So that's what's really unique about this thing. So I'm going to kick myself. And that's why I'm one of those genuine sellers that goes, I'm not in a rush to sell it. So it's going to the right person, happy to hang on to it. When the time comes, the time comes. And
I guess the $1 million question is, how much are you asking for this 6.2 litre V12 monster?
I think for the condition of this car, I'm being actually very reasonable. So I've asked around 525, so 525,000, just a little bit over that. And I guess the beauty of these cars is, or whoever actually ends up owning this car, is that whatever maintenance that they would normally have to do during their ownership on a car, it's done. One of those genuine cars and genuine comments. You can say that, literally turn the key, insure it, fuel it, go and enjoy it, because it's one of those cars that sometimes it can be daunting to some people because they go, oh, it's a little bit older, don't know, and it changes, buyers' minds. They go, I might go something more modern, but you're not going to experience what a real Lambo is like unless you actually spend some time with one of these things. It's another world.
Yeah, I'm jealous of the future owner of that car. They're going to end up with a pristine example of an iconic car.
Absolutely, yeah.
So before I let you go quickly, I can see some other interesting cars in the background. We've got a Diablo back there.
There is a Diablo, yeah.
Yeah, and we've got a Mazda Ute as well.
Yeah, so that one's quite popular on social media.
That looks like
it's quite a boisterous thing, but I'll take you sorry for the mess. But yeah, so the Gallardo is it's been spec'd up really nice from factory. So that's actually a factory paint. It's called Bianco Canopus, which is a satin, like flat white paint. It's one of the more, I think one of the most durous options paint-wise from factory. Thankfully, I bought the car secondhand, so whoever bought that original would have paid, I think, 35 or 40 grand for that paint option. But beautiful car, really, really good to drive. A lot more modern technology so that you can see, and I enjoy the difference between this car and that car because they both, you can see where technology went from 2004 to 2010. You can feel it, even though they're similar in regards to their, gearbox interaction, e-gear system. You can see where it's gone, and that's why I enjoy these two, because of that difference. The little Mazda up there, that was a car I bought, and it did not look like that. It was, I think I paid $2.5 grand for it. It was really, really rough. And I did a full bare metal resto on this thing. Like, I literally stripped it down. Every nut and bolt on that car is brand new. It's essentially a brand new car. There's nothing on it that is old except for the chassis, which has been redone. And the whole thing's, I put a rotary in it. So it raps around the streets, but it's good fun.
I imagine that's a keeper.
It is. I've spent too much money on that. If I was to sell it, you'd never recover. And your thing is, like, why would you? You're that far into it, and it's that clean. You're never going to find another one. I didn't make that to be a race car, even though it performs like one, but it's built to be reliable. Where everyone gets scared of rotaries, they're like, oh, you got to rebuild it every now and then. Nah, not this thing. This thing it's designed to be just like a healthy car that you can drive. It's got a lot of personality, and it ticks a few boxes. But that's actually, it's quite impressive. When you see the inside, outside, underneath, lovely.
It does look impressive. It looks super tidy.
Yeah, it's a great car.
I think that also speaks to how you look after your cars. So if anybody is interested in Bernard's Murcielago, head to performancecarlounge.com.au. I have all the photos of his car, all the information about the car, and a link to the ad so that you can get in contact with Bernard. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating chatting with you.
Likewise, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been great.
And wish you all the best with the sale of this iconic car.
Thanks, Stuart. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us at Performance Car Lounge. If you have a performance car with an interesting story that you are selling, contact us at performancecarlounge.com.au.